Hey everyone, welcome to yet another webinar in our webinar series. And today we have Josh Rappoport, who in a minute or so allow him to introduce himself. Today we're talking about a topic which is very close to Josh's heart and is also something we get a lot of questions about from our audience. We're talking about as finance as a function is evolving, what does finance leadership look like as it evolves, and key insights for success. Josh will be speaking from his personal experience, and before I set the agenda for the discussion, I will quickly let Josh introduce himself, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, Purva. I really appreciate it. So, when I introduce myself, I always get a little bit surprised about how long I've been doing this. It's a little scary, to be honest. But I started my career way back, almost 30 years ago. Yeah, that's a little frightening. But I really started my career with the intent and the desire to run a business one day. I had a much more generalist approach to what my future self would be. And I originally went into investment banking, private equity, venture capital. I wanted to be an investor, and realized about halfway through that relatively short portion of my career that investing was great, but I really liked operating. I liked the idea of operating, and I wanted to be a good operator initially because I thought having operating experience would make me a better investor. But then as I got, it's just fun. It's fun to grow things. It's fun to execute. It's fun to say you're going to do something and hopefully do it. But even if you aren't able to learn from it. So I went from your typical Wall Street journey to operating generally in technology companies. I was at Yahoo. I was at Microsoft for almost a decade. And then I went from kind of the mega cap, huge monolithic technology companies to a series of small fintech startups, Bilgo, which is a bill payment platform, AirTM, which was a crypto-enabled cross-border remittance company. And then I spent a year, I started a consulting company called Lined Up Finance, where I've been consulting and advising early stage startups in SaaS, CFO tech, fintech. Did that for full time for about a year. Now I'm doing that part time as I joined Acumatica, which is a cloud-based ERP software company, to lead the FP&A team here at Acumatica as we go through really rapid growth and scale. Growing from, let's call it 10-digit revenue to hopefully 8-digit or 11. Sorry, wow, not backwards. 11-digit revenue. So I just betrayed my finance self. I don't even know how to count apparently.
Awesome. No, Josh, thanks for the intro. And I don't think too many people make the switch from investing to operating, and even if they do, not too many stick to it. So there's clearly something you like about this side, and I'd love to kind of bring that out as we speak and speak more and have a discussion in today's session. I want to spend maybe the next 25-ish minutes going through our flow, but also kind of want to make sure questions from people continue to come in, and we'll take questions to make this more interactive for the audience, which is what truly brings out the most value for everyone. And I think we have people from kind of all over the country. I see a few messages. So yeah, please introduce on chat. And great. So Josh, today we want to talk about how the finance function is evolving, and to stay relevant, what essential skills do you need? How do you improve your business acumen within finance teams, especially as you need to work with other business teams within the company? As you go into a leadership role, how do you kind of become more effective leader and differentiate yourself in leadership? And of course, we talk about challenges. So this is a topic that a lot of people write to us about. So let's dive right in. I want to start with your opinion on, in your view, right? What has been the traditional role of the finance function, and how do you think it's evolving today? I know you have very strong views on this.
Strong, hopefully not terribly controversial. I think that finance organizations over the last almost 2 decades have really traversed this journey of being what I refer to as kind of inward looking to becoming more outward looking business value drivers. And in particular, I think kind of the old school model of finance and controllership has been really around more of a reporting nature. What happened?
Yeah.
What happened, and maybe a bit of a diagnostic nature. So what happened and why did it happen? I think that was kind of that was state of the art for finance 15 years ago. So I talk about like descriptive, diagnostic. I think as we have evolved over the last decade or so in finance, we've been asked by our business partners, by our CEOs, by our investors to be more than just descriptive and diagnostic, and really to be more, firstly, predictive. So what happened? Why did it happen? That's great, but what's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then I think the next step, really, I think the hallmark of what modern finance is today is not just being predictive, but being prescriptive. So defining what business outcomes we want to achieve for the business, and not only defining what we want to achieve, but defining how we can achieve them.
Yeah.
So answering questions like what could happen and what would be required in order for that, or what should happen, but what maybe do we need to happen, and how do we get there? And that becomes the power of what a modern finance organization can do today, beyond simply telling us what did happen.
So I guess, Josh, one question for you, what do you think has changed in the last decade or so? Like, why is this shift happening in the last decade? Why did this not happen like 100 years ago?
Yeah, I think firstly, it's the confluence of one, like, business is hard, right? None of this is easy, and as technology has enabled, everything in our society to move much faster, we've had to be in business. We've had to be much more agile. And I think, well, I think we might talk about this a little bit later, but finance, when done right, has really interesting central view of everything that's happening in a business. For better or for worse, every activity in a business has some sort of financial impact, whether it's we're spending money or we're generating revenue or we have an opportunity cost, et cetera. So there's a way to look at every activity in a business through a financial lens. And because of that, and because of finance's central kind of call it location within an organization, we have this unique view. And therefore, as things are moving really quickly, we're one of the few organizations, the few professionals, the few leadership opportunities where you can start to tie together all the disparate pieces.
Yeah.
And as a result, finance organizations are being asked to weigh in more, to really think in an operating, mindset, to really think strategically, and to help enable good business decision making. Because ultimately, this is all about making good decisions and executing against those decisions. So I think it's technology, it's tool sets, it's the speed at which our environment is changing, and it's our central location within the organization and the visibility that provides us.
Fair enough. Makes sense. No, I mean, I think a lot of it is, as you said, right? Business is just harder, and technology, like, it's enabling people to do so much more. So if you don't evolve, you become stale. And with that context, for finance leaders or executives to be playing a more predictive and prescriptive and a more proactive role, what skills do people need today to stay relevant and be among the best in the game?
Sure. So let me first start by saying all of the, call it, next generation modern finance skills that are required are predicated upon more traditional skills. I actually realized that this is happening in my team today. I emphasize things like business partnering, storytelling, our own business acumen, understanding all those activities that are happening that aren't core finance activities. But sometimes what I forget to emphasize is our ability to be predictive, our ability to be prescriptive is predicated upon like this relentless focus on the details, relentless focus on, quality financial analysis, frankly, like doing the math right, making sure the numbers are correct. So I don't want to de-emphasize that. Those core finance skill sets are what all professionals and what all current and future leaders are kind of, standing on those skills.
Yeah.
But I think kind of what then differentiates us, and we mentioned them here on the slide, are business partnering, having the trust and understanding of your functional business partners, whether it's your marketing leader, your engineering leader, your HR leader, et cetera, being able to have open, honest, productive, collaborative conversations with them about what they're seeing in the business, what they're trying to execute, what their challenges are, and bringing that back to from a perspective of how can I, as a finance person, help you solve your problems? How can I make your life easier? I think storytelling is really important. Increasingly, it's, I think always, you look at a public company, you look at an earnings, call, and it's often the CFO and the CEO telling the story of what happened in the most recent period. I think that skill set is being, almost pushed down into the organization. We all, as finance people, need to tell a story. We use our numbers to tell a story, but the dollars and cents happen to be the language that we use. But we're telling stories about what's happening and what can and could happen, what will happen, or and then lastly, business acumen, because really what's happening now is finance is no longer this narrowly focused specialized skill. It is that, but it's also understanding. I mentioned it before, understanding marketing, understanding product development, understanding the sales motion, et cetera. And so I think it's our responsibility as finance people to really kind of have a little bit of a general mindset. I'll put it that way. To be curious about how things happen.
I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm sorry. So that's not a skill you learn in school, right? You learn numbers, you learn math, you learn analysis, but you don't learn marketing or you don't learn sales. Like, if you need to be a true partner, how do you upskill yourself?
I think it depends whether we learn in a whether we learn in a school, which is possible. I mean, I did a business degree as an undergrad and got my MBA and took courses in lots of different functions. So like there's an academic path for that, certainly. But I think most critically, you learn by being curious. So I talk to my team, I talk to my colleagues about the thing that drives me personally is I just want to learn stuff always. I always want to be learning things. And I have this argument with my 8-year-old because he'll ask a question. I said, "Oh, let's figure it out together." So he'd say, "I just want the answer." Well, just getting the answer isn't the way to learn things, right? You have to be curious and you have to seek out information. And so, asking the right questions or asking any questions really, acknowledging what you don't know and kind of owning that and feeling proud of that, because not knowing is not a invalidation of who you are. It's an acknowledgement that like now we're at the start of a journey of learning. It's wanting to talk to your colleagues outside of finance, understand, hey, what are you doing today? Why are you doing that? Why does that matter? How does this work? So again, it's I sometimes talk to my team about channeling their inner 5-year-old, or 3-year-old or inner toddler, let's call it. I don't know who in the audience has little kids, but you'll probably relate to when they're really small. They you'll tell them something or ask them something, they'll ask you why, and then you'll give them the answer. But why? And why and why and why and why. So the constant repetition of why, I think, really helps us learn. And you don't need to have an academic degree in marketing to understand how marketing works, or a degree in engineering to understand at least the mindset of an engineer. Now, please don't ask me to write code; that will be a disaster. But the other thing I will say, and it's not here on the slide, is what I kind of downplayed in my very brief introduction of my experiences. I've had professional experiences within finance organizations and outside of finance organizations. So in particular, when I was at Microsoft, I had a great opportunity to leave the finance organization and go join a product organization in strategy roles, business operation roles, and then in fact in product management. And so there's no better way to learn something than by doing it. It is a pretty non-traditional path for finance people, but I want to make the argument, and maybe this is a little bit controversial, I want to make the argument that it's great for finance people to have experience outside of a core finance role.
Absolutely. Yeah, it helps you kind of build that business acumen and collaborate more effectively, which brings me to my next question. Like, how do you actually transition from being an inward focused department to, being value additive and, cooperating with the relevant business teams. Like it's not an easy switch to make.
It's an evolution, firstly. So I think, firstly, like your organization needs to be open to it. Like not every organization is as progressively thinking around the role of finance. I think by and large in technology companies, software companies, technology companies, we tend to be, further along on that journey towards cooperative value-added team. I think there are a couple key things. So one is I mentioned earlier, we have to embody this idea that finance is here to help our business partners solve their problems.
So, Josh, I want to make this a little real. Can you give an example of? You don't have to take names or cite examples, like any specific function and how you were actually able to add real value. Let's make this a little more real for the audience, and then we'll get to how you can do that.
Sure. So, gosh, I'm trying to think of the best example. It's kind of an everyday thing here. So recently I had a CIO reach out to me and say, hey, we weren't anticipating the growth that we've had.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're reaching capacity on our infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to evaluate different opportunities. Do we continue with our outsourced infrastructure partner? Do we think about bringing in-house or build our own infrastructure? There are significant cost differences. There are significant cost timing differences. There are concerns around funding and how we would fund it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, for me, the first thing I heard was, we're growing a lot faster than we thought, which I like. This is great. This isn't a problem. This is actually a really good thing. So I think, sometimes as finance people, we have the opportunity to if nothing else, just play therapist to reframe people's problems as actually good things. And then, what I did in particular in this instance is, my team and I do nothing. My team does everything. I have that luxurious position of being able to direct, but they do the hard work. But what we really did is we said, okay, let us help you understand that, there's a difference between a cash outlay view, like let's say there's going to be capital expenses building out infrastructure versus a GAAP view, how it would actually hit the P&L. Mm-hmm. And let us share with you kind of some of the concerns around cash flow, funding, et cetera, but also some of the opportunities that, this isn't, tens of millions of dollar, P&L hit this period. It actually, the cash out might be that, but the P&L impact is actually over a different period of time, and we can refocus the analysis. We can help build a business case. We can go to our senior, our executive team, and go to our investors and present a really compelling business case. So this is, I'm trying to keep it a little bit higher level, just not to betray too many details of what was going on in my business today. But I think kind of the reframing, the understanding of our partners' challenges, what it is that they're trying to accomplish and why. Yeah. And just like a steadiness, a calmness, like, okay, this isn't, the sky's not falling. This is actually a good thing. Being able to kind of be there and counsel as well. I should say though, like that takes a great deal of mutual trust. So that conversation, frankly, probably would have never happened if not for the myriad of conversations over the last year with our business partners about probably much smaller things, and proving that, finance as a business partner, proving that we as finance people deserve a seat at the table because we are curious and willing to understand our business partners' challenges. We're capable of understanding them and helping find solutions. We can create solutions that help them execute on what they want to do or what they need to do more readily, more easily, more profitably, et cetera. And this becomes a flywheel, because the more you do it and you start small, the more you create trust, the more you prove that you're an effective partner, that you're there for them, the more that they're going to want to reach out to you and bring you closer into the fold, the more you have more insight into what's happening, and you can be more productive. And it's a flywheel, The flywheel. I mean, it's the definition of a flywheel. And I think what happens too is I've been in situations throughout my career where, as a finance person, I'm distrustful of my business partner.
Yeah.
Right? Just as much as I'm sure we've all been in circumstances where our business partners express distrust for finance. In fact, early, kind of middle of my career, at one point, we were going through reductions in force, as many large technology companies did at the time. And I was walking down the hallway in the office one day, and somebody called out to the out in the hallway at me like, "Hey, Grim Reaper." I'm like, "Great!" So I'm considered the Grim Reaper now as a finance person. So
Yeah.
now I will take the silver lining on that, is the person trusted me and liked me enough to be able to joke with me about that. But
Yeah.
it's mutual trust. The more we prove to each other that we're actually aligned and trying to drive aligned outcomes for the for the benefit of our business, which is really for the benefit of our customers, the more there's call it that bilateral communication, the bilateral sharing, and what it turns out to be is that
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you there.
I told you I talk too much, so thank you for stopping me.
Yeah, and I told you I'm good at interrupting. I actually see a question from the audience here, which is very topical to what you're talking about. It says that, I keep thinking about building long-term relationships with business teams in general. Can you share a strategy or a tactic that has proven effective in fostering these partnerships? Like, why did you mentioned this is basically what you were just talking about right now. Like, you've been able to build these relationships.
Mhm.
What
Sure.
has helped you do that?
Yeah, I mean, there so much of this is now kind of psychology, truly. One thing I tell my team, I have a relatively young team that's working on building business partnerships and relationships. So this is really top of mind for me. And one thing I tell them is people like people who are interested in them. It's almost like dating, right? Suddenly somebody shows interest in you when you're dating, you're like, oh, I have more interest in them. And so it's not dissimilar in a business context, where the more we show questions, we ask questions with curiosity, as opposed to like interrogating,
Yeah.
as opposed to in an accusatory way. As finance people, we can express a curiosity about a
Mm.
person's goal, a person's objective, etc., that allows them to see you for who you are, where they want to bring you in because suddenly they like you a little bit more because you're showing interest in them. So I think
Yeah.
that's one kind of foundational tactic. The other, I think somewhere earlier in the slides we talked about the central view that finance has, and I'll talk about, I'll call this kind of the language aspect. So each function has its own language. There's a language of marketing and a language of sales and a language of engineering and a language of HR. And
Yeah.
what happens is finance sits in the middle. I say kind of, we have this privileged perch is what I call it. We sit right in the middle, we see everything. And we hear lots of different languages.
Yeah.
And so the more we can learn our partner's language, speak to them in ways that they understand, with terminology that they understand, as opposed to in finance speak. I've been accused by that many times in my career. It's like, we start talking financial terms and our business partners' eyes glaze over and they tune out and they go start reading their email instead of having a conversation with you. Speaking your partner's language, again, you can teach yourself. Quite catch that?
That just goes back to being curious. Like, you have
Yeah,
to
of
learn.
course. Yeah, being curious, always wanting to learn. And then what happens is the outcome of that is I say, finance has this opportunity of being the Rosetta Stone of the organization.
Yeah.
We can translate, and it's not just translating from our business partner's language back to finance, back and forth. But if I can translate from, for example, marketing to finance and engineering to finance and HR to finance, well, I can also translate from HR to engineering to marketing to strategy to my investors' language. And
Yeah.
so really finance can be this unlock. We can be that universal translation layer. We can
Yeah.
be that Rosetta Stone.
Yeah.
And it's all, again, forming relationships, gaining trust is all about proving that you're useful,
Yeah. But
right?
building trust, you have to show value, and you
Yeah,
build trust long term.
yeah.
Fair
But be
enough, John.
careful what you ask for, by the way. You don't want to be too useful because then you just It's request after request after request. I do joke around. I say I have a philosophy of strategic incompetence. So there's some things that I know I just don't enjoy doing. So I pretend like I don't know how to do them, and hopefully nobody will ask me.
I like how you call it strategic incompetence. Awesome. I do have one more question here from the audience, which is in line with what we wanted to talk about next anyway. So,
Great.
you know, what you're talking about, right? Cultivating these skills, obviously you've learned it over the years. How can aspiring finance professional break into senior roles? Like you need, of course, you need technical proficiency, which is what you mentioned. You need to be good at, the what and the reporting, but what are the softer skills or qualities you believe are important? And like, I want to, like, I know we've already discussed being curious and, learning on the job. Is there anything else out of just being curious you need to do?
Yeah, I think so. The difference between early, mid, and then later, more senior kind of finance role is that as you progress and become more senior, it requires being able to synthesize more information into kind of to weave that bigger picture, that bigger narrative. And so early in our career, we focus on a technical skill set. And I'll actually kind of call back to my career at Microsoft. I remember having career conversations that, I was kind of mid-career when I was at Microsoft. Career conversations with my mentors and my leaders who said, here at Microsoft in particular, you want to get revenue finance experience and OpEx finance experience and enterprise B2B and B2C and maybe online services and maybe software and maybe data center and maybe you want product finance experience and sales finance experience. You kind of gather, this is the metaphor, you gather all your tools into your toolbox and you have a full set of toolbox. I think that still holds true today, but I think there's another layer on top of it, which is not just how do I have all these tools in my toolbox, but how do they all relate? How do I now use each and every one of these tools to build the beautiful mansion, big skyscraper, that eighth wonder of the world, so to speak? How do I weave it all together and see the big picture in addition to the small details? Because ultimately, we're trying to drive the business now, as opposed to executing on a finance rhythm, let's say.
Fair enough. Yeah, that it's definitely not something that comes naturally to most people. I'd say you need to be very, very conscious about it and be more proactive to cultivate that skill. Like it's not something you will just like.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think for 3/4 of our career we focus on depth. Just go deep and deep and get better and better and better and better and better at the thing we do, and then at some point, in order to get to that next level, you not only have to be so depth and technically oriented and competent and more than competent. Now suddenly you need to be able to see how it all relates. And so suddenly that breadth of understanding becomes super important. And I think there are ways to kind of facilitate growth in both at the same time. Again, for me, it's about being curious. But so that's really how I did it. That said, I'm now looking at the next slide here, kind of leadership, and I will say these are, kind of 4 of my leadership principles. And again, like I had an approach to how I've grown my career and how I've been successful and frankly at times not successful. I think it's important for everybody to understand that like what works for me or what works for any one individual may not be precisely what will work for everybody else. A lot of, particularly as we get to leadership, it's very personal. It has to ring true for you and who you are and what your values are. Because if I try to lead in a manner that somebody else has been successful leading, like that just may not be who I am.
It's not your style. Yeah.
Right. So I do, I love to talk about my leadership philosophy, but I want to acknowledge that like it's not a prescription.
Yeah.
In fact, the prescription is find what's important to you. Find the values that you internalize, that you live by, and lead by those.
Yeah.
So for me, and we've talked about a couple of these, like for me, like my favorite answer to any question is I don't know. because it does a couple things. Like, and I tell my team this all the time. Like, please, like if you don't know something, say you don't know, and wear it a badge of honor, because when you say I don't know, that is the beginning of a journey to gaining more knowledge. It's not an indictment of who you are or what you lack. It's an acknowledgement of how you can grow. So I
I'm
love
gonna
that.
ask you a follow-up question there. This might actually benefit the audience. Like, can you maybe give me a recent example? It may not be recent, but sometime when somebody asked you something, you didn't know it. You said, I don't know. And then I'm sure the curious soul within you went on, and I would love to know what you did after to make sure you didn't have to say, I don't know to that same question again.
Yeah. Heck, okay, so, really interesting. So I left Microsoft in 2018-ish, 17, I don't know. I've lost track of the years. And I joined a 50-something person startup in the bill payment space called Bilgo.
Yeah, I'm just going to put a small plug there. If you, one of the best billing tools I know in the market is called Zenskar. Just joking, we can continue with Josh.
When I got to Bilgo, primarily their revenue stream at the time was, it was like 99% credit card interchange revenue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny looking back, but like at the time, like, sure, of course I've heard of Visa and MasterCard and American Express, but like it never even struck me that they were revenue generating businesses. I mean, I think today, fintech is a little bit more front and center, but like, I just like, yeah, I have a credit card in my pocket and I use it to pay things. I didn't think like these are like tens of billions of dollars of revenue businesses, and how the heck do they make their money?
Yeah.
And I remember like, I was introduced to the company because, I was fortunate, a friend of mine was one of their lead investors, and I just, I met the CEO, I met the president of the company, and we embarked not on conversations about a job. We were just talking, periodically about the business and what was interesting about it and whatnot. And, I don't know that I explicitly said I don't know to something, but what I did was acknowledge I didn't know anything about the credit card interchange business model.
Yeah.
And what I did do though is I asked lots of questions because I realized I didn't understand and I wanted to understand. And I think that it had all the positive things that we've been talking about. It meant, like, first of all, the person I was talking to said, like, hey, this I think this is a person who is not egotistical. This is a person who embraces knowledge. This is a person who wants to understand who I am and what my business is, etc. So like, I just said, I don't know. I don't know how Visa makes money. Help me learn. And it was a really cool experience. I ended up being asked to join the company and build their whole finance operations and controllership, function, and the rest is a bit of history. But yeah, that was a perfect example of saying I don't know. By the way, if anybody wants to learn about credit card interchange, I could have a multi-hour conversation with you. Teach you today.
Yeah. I studied that industry for the first time when I was doing venture capital investing. It's fascinating how that industry makes money, but that is a topic for another time, not for today. I want to be cognizant of time. I think we have only like 5 odd minutes to go. Maybe I know you have a couple of more points to talk about just on this slide. You want to pick those up, and then maybe we can take one question from the audience.
So for me, like, I talk about embracing different points of view. So I grew up in the Northeast. So like, I feel like debating is like part of your nature when you grow up in Boston or York. Well, it's usually about sports teams, but nonetheless, debate is something we really engage vigorously in. And I think there are times when we can be afraid of debate. It seems argumentative. It seems very personal. And I like to reframe this, and so I talk about embracing different points of view in a way to help us expand our own point of view. And I like to embrace different points of view and debate those points of view because it helps us learn more about ourselves and the idea. But I think it's also incredibly important that when we debate differing points of view, the debate has to be about the idea and not about the person, right? It's really easy to argue because, well, you're dumb and you're foolish, like that's not productive for yourself or anybody else. But when
I want to quickly highlight that point because that's something I tell everybody in our team as well. If you want to, make your point heard, always separate the what from the who. Like,
Yep.
don't talk about you are wrong, talk about the idea, and that just makes the other person far less defensive and far more receptive to your feedback. So completely agree with that. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Yeah, please go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I'll try to go quickly through these. I do have a huge bias towards simple.
Yeah.
Because simple is not easy, by the way. Simple is
Yeah.
really, really, really hard. And why is it hard? It's because it takes a lot of understanding to be able to simplify things down to their core essence.
Yeah.
But what I have found, and I kind of pair this with this another idea, which is like you go slow at first
Mhm.
in order to go fast. So you take the time, you invest the time to understand something well enough that you can really simplify it.
Mhm.
And then when things are simple, then you can execute really, really, really quickly.
Yeah.
So think about like there's this concept in engineering of tech debt, right? Well, heck,
Yeah.
we just need to get the code out, and we recognize that we can do it really quickly but messy, and
Yeah.
that may create issues down the road and slow us down. But hey, we're making this trade-off. Well, there's like the intellectual equivalent of tech debt, where we can move fast at first, but we create this complication that makes it hard to scale or move fast in the future. And so if we invest time early on to have that beautiful architecture, that intellectual architecture, so to speak, have that elegant code, the elegant thought process, that simplified view, it allows us then to execute a lot faster in the future. But
Yeah.
it's somewhat counterintuitive, because it means like you do at first, you have to slow way down. And sometimes you're not sure if that's going to pay off for you, but I assure you, like 9 times out of 10, it will.
Yeah, it's a trade-off always, but mostly like, you have to make sure you're slowing down just the right amount.
Yeah.
Uh, and then at some point you realize, okay, now I can go fast. But that it's like building a solid foundation
Yep.
before
Exactly.
you can do the rest of the building. So,
Mhm.
Josh, I see one question here that I really want to take, and
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't think we have more time for more than one. This is again, people are seem to be wanting to learn from your experience, so I'm going to pull this in. Uh, Regarding leadership in finance, could you share an example of a difficult decision you had to make and how your leadership approach guided your team through it?
Mm-hmm. Uh, you know, I think the beauty and also the challenge of finance is that we make difficult decisions every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
One of the hardest for me in a finance leadership role, and thankfully I don't foresee this being an issue currently in my role, but in my past I've had to reduce headcount really significantly, cut burn, manage cash, get to the next next fundraising round, and we realize that the economy has changed, or the outlook on crypto changed, for
Yeah.
example. So probably the hardest decisions I've made as a finance leader revolve around people, because what you realize very, very quickly is we're not just talking numbers in a spreadsheet. We're
Yeah.
talking about individuals that we know, that we work with, that we trust, and not just the individuals, but their families and their dogs and their mortgages and their rent, and everything everything that is part and parcel with being a human being. And so those are really, really almost emotionally difficult. But how do you make those decisions? And for me, it actually is the fourth leadership principle that I didn't get a chance to talk about. So conveniently, so I get to talk about this one now. It's aligning on first on our principles and not on the outcome. So finance in particular is in business in general is we focus a lot on what does the outcome need to be.
Yeah.
But when we're going into a particularly difficult decision, what I try very hard to do is not focus on what outcome do I want,
Mhm.
but what are the principles by which we're going to make decisions. In
Mhm.
effect, think of it as like the algorithm that we're going to use to make decisions.
Yeah.
And if we can agree on what those principles are, so for example, one principle that we used when we were looking at a reduction of force at one of my companies was we're not the principle was we're not going to lay people off based on their individual performance. What we're going to do is we're going to evaluate what roles are critically necessary for our future growth and what roles are lower priority. And we're going to make decisions around what roles, not what people we're going to eliminate. So that was, one principle that we agreed upon as an executive team. And believe me, that alignment up front really helped us make hard decisions about individual roles, because say, hey, we really need to cut that role because in the grand scheme of things, it's the lowest priority. But then you have that leader say, well, but that person's so great and they're an exemplary employee, and like, okay, but remember, we aligned on what roles are important, not the individuals. And so it helped us make really difficult decisions that were very emotional, frankly. And so that's one example. But I think kind of aligning on principles, really it's decision-making code.
Yeah.
Right? And you can execute the code without having to get heartburn around what the output of the code, what the output of the decision is. Also, if you go about it the other way and go like, okay, we need, use this example, we need to lay off people, but I want to make sure that, Mary stays and Joe stays, but Bob is going to go. And like, now you've got this really messy code because you have no consistency of thought. And it's much harder to make decisions, particularly harder.
Yeah, it's also kind of related to the point you made previously about separating the person from
the who. Yep.
Yeah.
But you can apply, I really like this idea of aligning on principles. It actually, if I think about the genesis of the thought for me, it actually came from something I learned from one of my leaders around negotiating. We were doing a lot of, when I was at Microsoft, I was working on a lot of third-party strategic partnerships. And you would negotiate, and in negotiation, it's really easy to just think about what outcome you want.
Yeah.
And usually what outcome you want isn't necessarily aligned with the person the entity you're negotiating across the table from. They might have other outcomes that they want, but if you can align on what the principle of the negotiation is,
exactly,
and agree that those principles hold, then whatever the outcome is, it's really hard to argue with. Now, if you're really, really good, you can influence what the principles are in order to get the outcome you want, but that's a whole other story. That's like, negotiation 401, not 101.
Awesome. Well, I wish we had more time. I have a bunch of more questions in the audience here, but we're already like 3 minutes over time. So thanks a lot, for, sharing your experiences with, the people on the audience who seem to be kind of, most of the questions I saw were more about your previous experience and wanted to learn from practical experience. So it's great having you, Josh.
And let me offer that, like, I learn as much from everybody else as, probably more so from everybody else than you're learning from me. If you have any questions or thoughts or something you'd like to share, I love to talk to folks because, again, it broadens my perspective, which I think is beneficial. Feel free, Josh Rappoport, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out, say hello, introduce yourself. Let's talk, and I hope we can all benefit from it.
Awesome. That's really, gracious of you, Josh, and I'm sure people will reach out. Awesome. Thanks a lot. See you all in another couple of weeks, one of the next sessions in our webinar series. And thanks again, Josh. Thanks a lot for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hope the weather stays sunny. Awesome. Take care now.
Bye.